As DP leaders, we are naturally attuned to timelines, policies, academic integrity protocols, assessment security, and all the documentation because the IB is a high trust, high stakes program at the end of the day. But in focusing on so much on getting the process right, we often underestimate how much the culture of the DP shapes outcomes. Protect the culture of the program as much as you protect its compliance. At the end of the day, students don't just experience the diploma program through subject guides or assessment weightages. The way challenges are positioned in classrooms, how learning setbacks are interpreted, how those academic honesty conversations are had, whether it is seen as a surveillance or as a shared value. And that culture is set very subtly by program leadership.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to IB Matters. And I'm here with Rohit Vaswani from India, who will tell you about himself in a minute. But he did something that I love it when listeners do this. He's been listening to the podcast for a while, and he thought his experiences might be interesting to you. And I'm sure they will be, because we've been talking a little bit in the background and preparing for this podcast. And his experiences are very relatable. So welcome to the podcast, Rohit.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I've really enjoyed listening to the IB Matters podcast over time. And what I really like is that the conversations are just so insightful, authentic, and most importantly, rooted in lived experiences. So I'm excited about this chat.
That's great. Thank you. In fact, I'll have to take that excerpt and use it in an ad or something. I'll have to put that out there. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I said you're from India, but that's a big country, as we all know. Where are you from?
Well, my name is Rohit, and I currently work in the capacity of the IB Diploma Coordinator in one of the largest IB continuum schools in Mumbai, India. I've been working in the international education and within the IB ecosystem for a little over 14 years now, having spent time both as an IB mathematics educator and now as a DP coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the bigger things about this role that particularly excites me is the system design in education.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy working when intentional programs, structures, and design meets everyday classroom practice to support both teachers and students in meaningful ways.
Yeah, when you and I first communicated, I was impressed by the way that you've kind of approached learning the job, and also now gives me a little insight when you say you were a mathematics instructor. You know, as a science instructor myself, I kind of have systems in my head, and I appreciate when systems are designed so that they work and are repeatable. And it's not always, there's a lot of art to it as well, but we need to have the systems to kind of help we can be dependent upon.
Yeah, I think a lot of creative solutions to put together, looking at changing demands and needs and trying to see what's best for the students. I think, like you rightly said, it's artsy in a way, but also logical in a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. So you started as a IB teacher, and so then how did you end up getting the role as a DP coordinator?
I honestly never thought that I would ever step out of that classroom because I really enjoyed that space.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed being around with students. I really enjoyed that whole idea of, there's something incredibly immediate and energizing about working directly with students
Yeah.
and, seeing that learning unfold in real time, designing lessons, sort of responding to those misconceptions. So I was pretty happy in that space. And I was doing it for quite some time, and then suddenly there was an opening in school, and as all other openings are, it was open to internal teachers first
Hmm.
for all the vacancies that we have in school, and I thought of probably just giving it a try, and I never thought that I was getting across the line, honestly, but I felt like let's just give it a try and see where this goes, and one interview led to the other, and then I saw myself getting this role, and I quite enjoy it now that I've been in this for quite some time.
Yeah. How
I
long have you
quite
been
I
doing
quite
it?
like it. Sorry, this will be my second year into the role now.
Okay. So you've been through all the first year, there's a lot of new things, deadlines and jobs to do. And so once you get through it once, and I'm sure you took good records, you kind of go, okay, now that this year I have to do this and this.
Yeah, sorry, I think I feel a little bit more settled this year in terms of understanding the whole compliance angle, at least. still trying to learn on the job on things in terms of working with the team and trying to set things and systems in place.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of you got the job. What happens next? How did you prepare to do that?
I didn't quite prepare myself much for it, but I think having fairly taught the diploma for quite some time, I was comfortable with the curriculum expectations, the internal assessments, or the academic integrity conversations, and the pedagogy and the program subject understanding and built of it. What I probably wasn't very fully prepared, or let's say not completely prepared for, was that shift from classroom leadership to a program leadership of sorts. And
Yeah,
like I said, while I was in classroom, I really enjoyed that time with the kids. And when you step into a coordinator's role, that proximity to the day-to-day teaching naturally changes, and
yeah,
there are more of these administrative responsibilities. So honestly, when I first stepped into the role, I approached it in the way most coordinators would probably do, like with a mixture of enthusiasm, well-disguised panic. I wanted to make sure that, that everything is in place. I've make sure that the timelines are being met, assessments are happening in comparable conditions. So essentially, we're also a school that run two campuses. So my learning curve was pretty steep in that sense because that alignment has to happen because although we run as two campuses, our philosophy and strategic intent is pretty much of that of one school. So, making sure that, those, say, predicted grade conversations are aligned
hmm,
in terms of evidence because I feel if this misalignment happens, it doesn't show up dramatically in the DP at least. It sort of accumulates quietly, and then suddenly you have students feeling overwhelmed or teachers feeling pressed for time and things like that.
yeah,
I think the first thing that I did as I approached the DP was to just understand the system, understand how all these cogs move together.
yeah,
Because initially I was just looking at my own subject. It really was about my own assessment, my timelines, about my students' progress in my class, in my subject and courses.
hmm,
I also learned a very important lesson from one school leader that I had the privilege to be a part of was to observe everything, live the system before trying to shape it. And
right,
what he always told all the time was, let's not ask what can I change? Let's start with what is already working and why.
yeah,
And I think for someone who's very new and stepping into this DP coordinator's role, trying to understand how these systems work, this thought sort of really helped me navigate through my first year. That is not replacing system, but sort of reinforcing the ones that already support the strategic intent.
yeah. That's a really great comment. And I was going to ask you about, kind of what kind of mentors and leadership you witnessed as you were a classroom teacher, and that really hits the nail on the head. What is already working and why? I think when people come in, if they have the good fortune to have a good leader beforehand, or they were in the system and saw it working, you can take all that. I think. By the way, let me just say I love your line, "Well disguised panic." I wrote that down while you were talking because I think that's a lot of coordinators. We're disguising some of the things that we don't know sometimes. And but anyway, get back to the process. But so as a math teacher, and you talked about your deep knowledge of how that process worked. You must have had a learning curve also, and just I remember thinking about, okay, well, the art people, they've got a whole different way of doing things to get those DP art projects uploaded, and how to have their shows vetted, and those types of things, or the people, the internal assessments that are orals, the oral exams that are done in the Lang and Lit and in the literature, and also in language B. So yeah, so tell me a little bit about that part of the learning curve. I know we're going to get to systems because I can hear it in your voice. You love that stuff, and I know we're doing it, and I do too. But I just want to, for the sake of the people listening that are like, how do you learn about all the other subjects?
Well, I think it's always on the job. The more you do, you get to know the nuances of it. You get to know the challenges of it. Assessment procedure shared by the IB
Mhm.
is the Bible, or I would say the document that
Yeah,
every new coordinator must just sort of read through properly. I almost read it for probably three, four times, and the nerd in me also underlined things that,
Yeah.
were I felt were really important. I think IB has such clear, crisp documentation, references to a lot of processes that are already in place. So it really, really helps. So when I first stepped into this, I was very new to the IO expectations for that matter,
Right.
or how would a schedule look like, and what if a student panics in between the IO exams out of anxiety or out of,
Yeah.
in general, not being very comfortable with that mode of assessment, things on those lines. I think reading through those documentation was really helpful. I fortunately had someone who had done the DP coordinator's role for 5 years, kind of stepping into her role of sorts. So I did have very immediate and direct access to someone who had lived this role for so long and
Yeah.
lived it in the most trying COVID times. So
Yeah.
knew the systems around and knew what goes on IBIS, and told me that, hey, don't keep the uploads till the very end. There's always a load coming through and everyone's trying to push it through. So let's time ourselves in a way. So those intermittent checks really help. Documentation combined with some support from people around who've done this job. I also might want to add that IB Answers was very prompt, and the help that you get from the IB support staff at times when you're stuck. And I remember very clearly writing to them and receiving responses immediately in a day or two.
Hmm.
So when it came to newer subjects and understanding its requirements or expectations from a coordinator's point of view, to begin with, at least starting off with ticking those compliances, if not understanding deeper in the first year, I think I found a lot of help from all these places, honestly. So that was really helpful and nice.
That's good to hear. Did you end up getting to go to training for coordinator?
I did the role of coordinator IB training. I think what it really helps you with is the philosophy underpinning the diploma program and the lens through which IB is designing the program.
Yeah.
So that helped bring in that lens.
Yeah.
But of course, when you actually tend to do it in reality, in your context, be it your school context or cultural or regional context, and you know how things are, it is of course a little more different in terms of, yes, theoretically it maps, but you need to sort of make those adjustments based on how it is for your own context.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a I'm glad you mentioned the thing about philosophy because there's no way that they can design a training that fits every single person who's sitting in front of them in the training. But if you have the overall general philosophy and know where they're headed, then you can have a better idea of, okay, how my system's going to be aligned to that philosophy. And every time we find ourselves in troubled times, whether it be the COVID, or right now people are thinking about AI. Where I'm located, we've had some local unrest, and the philosophy of the IB has been foremost in the forefront of people thinking about, okay, what's our goal here? How do we help kids? And we know that we have this mission that takes us, through the whole thing.
I think it provided a good framework of sort, a blueprint, if I may say, and then you sort of match those with the realities of your context and take it through. So that
Yeah.
really was helpful.
Okay, let's get to the good stuff now for your for your interests, especially with so you got the job, you've got the basics down, you've got some mentors and people around you can lean on. And how did you then kind of make it in something that was fitting you and fitting your school? What systems did you end up working with?
I don't think there was a single dramatic moment, John, honestly, when I said that, okay, now I'm thinking systems, or now this is where I need to go to. It was actually a lot more subtle. And if I'm being honest, slightly uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Because in the early months, like I said, I found myself doing what most new coordinators would do, tracking timelines, following up on submissions, basically ensuring that all the moving parts are moving as they should, and nothing really is slipping through the cracks.
Right.
So the program worked, but it worked because there was someone constantly sort of watching it, and that got me thinking. what if there is a more robust mechanism? Because we've been into the diploma for quite some time, so we already have systems in place. We have
Sure.
things that are already working for us.
Yep.
And I recall one example very categorically while designing the assessment calendar. We are a huge cohort, like we have 120 kids in almost every year. So multiple subjects across group four itself, we have around 5 to 6 subjects. And
Hmm.
when we were putting the group four IA submissions in the first draft of the proposal or submission on the assessment calendar, on paper everything was functioning, like each subject was had their timeline set, teachers were tracking those submissions, and so operationally basically we were on schedule.
Hmm.
But eventually what I began noticing was that several of these group 4 submissions were landing within the same window.
Yeah.
So students who were taking two sciences, which is quite common in at least in our school,
Yeah.
were effectively working towards two major internal assessments at the same point. So again, from an operational standpoint, nothing really had gone wrong. Like each subject was it was following its due diligence, its process from proposal to checking whether the student's work is authentic and things on those lines.
Hmm.
But from students' perspective, the experiences were very different. Like we started seeing rushed submissions or compromised reflections, and in some cases, even poor quality of work. And
Hmm.
that was not necessarily because students lacked understanding, but it was because they were managing two of these components simultaneously,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
And that's when it struck me that the issue wasn't within the subjects, but it was between them. Like, so instead of asking myself that has the department met their IA deadline, I started thinking on the lines of how do these deadlines interact for students taking combination of these subjects? And
Right.
that's when I realized that it would be good to have staggered submissions. And then I realized that in that cohort, there were no two students who had taken biology and physics. So we put biology and physics IA submissions on one day and staggered the chemistry and ESS submissions on the other day at the end of the same week.
Hmm.
So not only did I meet the timeline in terms of the crunch that we normally have with so many subjects across and their submissions across the year, we were able to sort of stagger this and sort of redistribute that cognitive load,
Hmm.
making it a lot more manageable for students.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
that's where my belief in systems sort of really strengthened, you
yeah.
know?
That's great. Let me just take time out just for listeners that aren't as familiar with what Rohit was just talking about. Students take six subjects, sometimes more, at the same time, along with the core responsibilities. And so it's not only important that the students have their load kind of balanced out. So a coordinator is often doing this. But what I'm hearing Rohit say is interesting to kind of take this year. This year there were no kids taking physics and biology. Maybe next year there will be. And so this idea
Yes.
of having that subtlety to your planning, you don't like, I know I can say I was guilty. I said, okay, this is the week that, science puts theirs in. This is the week that English does their IOs or whatever. So those things, that nuance of, okay, what about this cohort? Who's got conflicts here? And you have to drill down sometimes to look at your class schedules and see who needs more help and make sure that there aren't students, in that circumstance. So thank you for that example.
Yeah. Yeah, John, and I think what you rightly just pointed out, I think that alignment and that coherence often to me is sometimes looks very manual. Like unless like when that alignment drifts, someone will intervene, or when deadline converges, someone will coordinate, or when there is some inconsistency of sort, someone will come to rescue to sort of recalibrate. And
Hmm.
of course, I'm not denying it. Leadership becomes that connective tissue, but and it happens through vigilance and professionalism, and there's nothing wrong about it. But to me, vigilance doesn't seem of something on the lines of a design because it is pretty much dependent on effort, and effort can to me sustain excellence for some time, but over a period of time, there is a certain small sense of instability that might come in, and that's why moving from the whole operational bit to bringing in that program architecture, especially in a program like diploma, to
Hmm.
me felt a lot more essential.
One of the things that you had shared in your notes was a word, a concept or a word that you are using, coherence. You want to talk a little bit about that term and how it's come to play a role in what you do?
Sure. I think at a very abstract level, John, coherence to me is whether a system feels intentionally connected or is it accidentally assembled in a way? Like in most complex environments like schools, the individual parts can function quite well on their own. Departments are organized, timelines are being met, assessments are conducted on time. But the real question isn't whether each part works independently, it is whether those are working in a concert or simply in parallel. And and I think the distinction becomes very, very visible in the DP. Theoretically, the diploma program is designed as an integrated experience. You have the core, which is meant to reinforce that subject learning, subjects that are meant to develop those transferable skills. And
Hmm.
students are meant to experience a progression over 2 years.
Yeah.
But in practice, if we are not intentional, students can't experience it very differently. So, for instance, they might be encouraged to engage in, say, an iterative drafting or a reflection in extended essay, but encounter an IA process in another subject where expectations are introduced much later. And it may feel like the emphasis here is more product driven than process driven elsewhere. So, individually, none of these decisions are problematic, but collectively, they're creating a learning experience where students feel like they're switching rule books every time. Like they're
Yeah.
moving whenever they're moving between different components of the program, they're switching that rule book. And I think that's where that coherence comes in. And so coherence to me uh, becomes about alignment in timing, in expectations, and more so in experience. I also want to add one more thing, John, that in the world of AI, it has become a lot more important because I, for sure, is a firm believer that it won't replace judgment or relational leadership, but it will accelerate that complexity. It will amplify those inconsistencies. It will expose weak design more quickly, in a sense. So when content can be generated instantly and data analyzed at a scale, the limiting factor isn't essentially going to be information.
Yeah.
It will be how it is all being put together, how it is being aligned, and how that coherence is coming in.
Yeah. The word coherence, we know how to use it in a sentence, but in the context of the IB and the diploma program in particular, I see what you're saying. I've shared this story, I think, before in the podcast, but it bears repeating, I think, in this moment is that one of my favorite IB trainings I ever went to. I was a science teacher, but I went to a group 3 or an individuals and societies training. It was a category 3, and I went to that because I had a new principal in my building who was in his background a social studies teacher. And so we went to that so he could get a feel for it in the context of what he knew as teaching. And that session that I went to in 2.5 days, they took the diploma history of the Americas exam and looked at the questions, and then they brought them all the way back through the MYP to the skill set that they were showing and developing in the criterion in MYP Group 3.
Right.
So it's like, okay, that is the coherence that IB has designed into it. And if you work backwards, and I can imagine when you mentioned AI, I go, hey, I could do that. In other words,
Yeah.
take a look at this sample exam. Show me some examples of some things that our kids could learn 4 years sooner, or what could be involved. Cool. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's so beautiful to see how these bigger picture things that IB has already put in is sort of, when you start discovering these, you sort of start figuring out how IB has been so intentional about designing these programs at, like, talk about inquiry in PYP and
Yeah.
transfer it into MYP, making it a lot more about interdisciplinary, then go into focus learning in the
Yeah.
diploma program.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful to see how this is all put together in this whole doc of the IB offerings.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I think, as you said, going all the way back to transdisciplinary in the PYP, and it is developed there. And I think that understanding the big philosophy of that helps any coordinator, no matter what program they're working with, to know kind of where are the kids coming from, where are they headed to. In the case of
Yeah.
MYP, I often think of MYP's really important role of helping those kids understand, and be judged in a way or assessed in a way that shows their skills are not all about just knowing the group A or part A of the assessment. It's the B, C's, and D's of those MYP assessments that are going to get you the success in the diploma program. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I had this experience myself, and you and I talked a little bit about this before. But the idea that, okay, you've got this job as a DP coordinator. You've stepped out of the classroom, and now allegedly you have some kind of control over the people who are your peers on the salary sheet or whatever you want to call it. But in fact, you really do need to guide them and help them, and maybe even ask them to do some things that usually only a head of school or principal might be doing. So talk us through that kind of change of your positional status in the building.
Well, I think one of the more unique leadership dynamics that's built into the DP coordinator's role is what you've probably mentioned. Like, and also at my school, for instance, the head of high school is typically the line manager for most DP teachers, like you said. So
Hmm.
I completely hear what you're saying in a way, and because theoretically you're accountable for the integrity of the program, like the timelines, the core implementation, academic honesty, and at the same time, you don't always have that formal line management over people delivering the parts or the larger chunks of that very same
Right,
program.
right.
And this sits very much in a space of what I like to call the influence paradox or, or
Hmm.
lateral leadership, where the effectiveness doesn't come from positional power, but to me, comes from clarity of the process, a shared purpose, and in turn, the credibility that you bring.
Hmm.
And in practical terms, especially at our school, that meant I very early on recognizing that I couldn't lead through compliance. Like I couldn't say that, hey, you must do this because I am saying so. Well, I'm your
Right.
coordinator of sorts,
Yeah. Yep.
But I could say, like, if we approach, say, IA scaffolding this way, I think it might reduce moderation discrepancies later. What do you think?
Hmm.
So instead of that directive leadership, it became about building professional consensus. And often, when teachers see the system level impact of these subject level decisions, they are far more willing to adapt. And while you bring in the point that there is no formal, you're not the formal line manager, I
Hmm.
also think not having direct positional authority works in many ways. Like it forces you to lead through coherence rather than compliance. Like
Hmm.
you invest more in shared understanding, in collaborative decision making, making the processes a lot more transparent and explaining, giving the rationale behind what's happening, why it is happening before simply just putting it out there. And over time, that builds a form of professional trust where alignment doesn't depend upon enforcement anywhere. It doesn't,
Hmm.
it seems more like a shared intent. So in many ways, that absence of direct line management shifts the role from supervision to stewardship of sorts.
Hmm. There's a lot of other things that go into this. I'm looking at some notes that we've got in front of us here. In terms of all the moving parts, we alluded to this before about the very many things. The calendar is full of things you have to do. If there's nothing in terms of internal assessments, now you're registering for exams and those kind of things. And those, are there any of those kind of systems that are more logistical that you found a way to make work more smoothly for you?
Yeah, well, actually, like you rightly said, implementation of exams and the logistics around it is typically a big thing when it comes to the diploma program. It brings together a wide range of logistical moving pieces, say from timetabling to attendance checks to board works to invigilation protocols and things like that.
Mm.
And since we are at the time where we are conducting mock exams, one example comes to my mind based on what you just asked is while these are important as have a lot of logistical pieces, it is also one of the most critical accountability responsibilities of a diploma coordinator. And what we're trying to do increasingly is to move away from that one man show
Mm.
to have shared responsibilities and resort to something of a distributive leadership approach. What we've done is rather than a coordinator, one single coordinator overseeing every operational detail, we run each assessment cycle through a rotating three-member exam team. So we offer that option for teachers to nominate themselves for these roles to support the coordinator. And these roles rotate across cycles, which means different members of the team across different subjects get that opportunity to step into leadership for specific operational components. So this not only builds capacity and confidence through authentic hands-on professional development, but also ensures the coordinator is well supported in this process.
Mhm.
And of course, there are certain roles that remain exclusively to the coordinator. I'm not taking away that, like final accountability to the IB, compliance submission, sensitive decision making. But I think when the operational and logistical leadership is distributed, it frees the coordinator to focus a lot more deeply on the other core responsibilities.
Mhm.
So I think this is something that we are increasingly trying to build capacity, trying to see where we can move to a much more robust system because now it is not the program running smoothly because of the knowledge. It is also because of the judgment and the ownership that is sitting across the team.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of my bigger program goals in this year and going further is to build something that is robust enough to function, let's say, on that autopilot mode, even
Mhm.
if you're continuing to support.
Yeah. I don't think I've heard of someone using an exam team, especially a rotating one. So give me an example of a job that you would hand over to members of that team. Would that be like scheduling rooms or getting volunteer invigilators or what kind of jobs do they do?
So multiple. So let's say in the three exam team, one person would be responsible for making the seating arrangement because we have
Okay.
multiple subjects. We have inclusion access.
Yep.
One person would be responsible for making the attendance sheet. One person would be responsible for ensuring the board work in terms of the timings. Because
Yep.
at times like today, we had design technology running alongside chemistry. And then we had kids who had 20%, 5% extra time. I had kids who had 50% extra time. And I had a kid who was using word processor.
Hmm.
So one teacher would involve making the board work. Then there would be a team that I would initially show them how I'm assigning the invigilation slots.
Hmm.
Then they would pick it up, they would do the invigilation slots. Things like making sure papers are bundled and stacked together properly, following up with teachers. For example, in mocks, we need to take question papers in the correct number of students, stacking them well before the exam. Also, in terms of stationery building, like, you want to
Yep.
organize the
Yeah.
stationery,
Yeah.
talk to the project management system to arrange speakers, audio speakers for an IO exam and things like. So I give them these portfolios and then work together with them. We do meetings. We start our meetings 1 month before the exam so they can start the prep, and then we take it from there. And at the end, I just supervise and see whether all of these pieces are in place. And then it really helps because at times we have a big cohort. And simple example is psychology in the morning session ended at 12:30. Afternoon session English, which is a full cohort of 120 kids, is to start latest by 1:15. So keeping the papers on desk, attaching their tags. So we distribute. So this person will put the tags, I'll put the cover sheet, other person puts the supplement, you know,
Hmm.
things on
Yeah.
those lines.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we sort of work it in that way.
I had flashbacks while you were explaining that. I'm going, I used to do all of that, and
Yeah.
we didn't have that big a cohort, but we did have, we had some cohorts that were in the 20s, and even just with that many, you still have to have all the rooms. You still have to have you have to have invigilators for everything. And you have to collect the papers and organize them. And, in the back in the day, I used to have to run to the post office, with the stuff directly right afterwards. So things have changed a bit, but there's a lot going on. So if you were listening to that just now and you're not a coordinator yet, don't be too scared off because yes, there's lots of things, but with all the experience that you have, and what a good idea to have a support team. I think some of our bigger schools do distribute some of the jobs, but often it's to an assistant that might be their job to help with the DP program. But we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to make sure we get to a couple things that we have on our list here, specifically more about. I think you just kind of answered the question about dependency on one coordinator. Do you want to add anything to that? Because that's certainly what you described certainly helps. You've got some capacity there.
Pretty much the same thing, John. I think in school, I think at least in my school, I see a lot of people wanting to learn. I am very fortunate to people who are very, very committed to their job. They're always wanting to grow. So offering that space also sort of gives them that professional incentive in a way. And also at the end, it's like a win-win. It helps you also to be supported in a lot of other things. So distributed leadership, like you said, we have a separate EE coordinator, a separate TOK coordinator, like these middle leadership capacity building roles, distributing portfolios to different people. But it's important, I must add, to identify the right set of people
Yeah.
to be able to do that. Because in the whole effort of trying to build capacity, distribute your load, you don't want to be handing over things to people who take a little bit too much, and in turn you're trying to figure out and clean up everything that you probably wouldn't have otherwise. So
Yeah.
it's important that you, as a program coordinator, you or a leader, whoever is deciding on figuring out who would be supporting the DP office, it must be a very intentional and a very strategic call and thought process based on the strengths of the individuals that you've identified.
Mhm. It's interesting how easily you can identify those people that could step up, the first person off the bench, so to speak, that TOK coordinator who you can clearly tell can do even more, So that's good. So identify, but also, like you said, distributing the leadership. That's a good one. Last thing that well, two things, but one more thing I want to talk about is the alignment between, design and the philosophy of a diploma program education. You want to speak to that a little bit?
I actually like that question a lot, John. I'm glad you asked because one of the things that really is unique about the DP is that it's grounded as much in philosophy as much it is in academic structure. Like we talk about the learner at the center, we talk about inquiry, reflection, international mindedness, student agency, and these are all philosophical commitments that come with the program. But what I've come to realize is over time is that philosophy only becomes real for students when it is reflected in design, when it is intentionally put in there. Because if we say we value reflection, but the EE or say the IA processes only meaningfully introduce reflection right before submission, then structurally we are privileging product over process.
Hmm.
Or if I'm taking an example of CAS, it is meant to be authentic, student-led, well distributed across all the three stands of C, A, and S, and not rush towards the end because DP students were prioritizing assessment-heavy components
Yeah.
earlier. Then the design doesn't really support that authenticity. So in many ways, the lived experiences of the DP is shaped less by what we say we believe, but more by how the program is designed to operate day to day. Because when that design aligns with philosophy, students experience the DP as progressive rather than episodic. That's when they say that reflection will become something that they practice, but not say they perform. Or evaluation sort of becomes inbuilt and not a habit. It sort of becomes a habit, but not a requirement. Integrity sort of becomes a part of a process and not like a declaration that I have not used AI or I have not, copied anybody's work. So alignment between what we live, what we believe the program stands for, and how we structure it is what allows the philosophy of DP to move from aspiration to its true experience that for which it is designed for.
Hmm. Yeah, we often say in politics, people say, if you want to know what I believe, look at the budget. And so when you say, if you want to know what you really believe, look at how we
Yeah.
schedule and operate our program, because the kids will, they'll figure it out. They'll say, well, what they really care about is my score at the end, not whether I'm taking time out to do my cast properly. Last thing, and I want to just, you have already shared a lot of great advice for diploma program coordinators and people involved in the program. Any advice for DP leaders, whether they be coordinators or heads of school or TOK coordinators or whatever? What advice do you want to leave people with?
I think it's a great segue to what you said earlier on in terms of making sure the authenticity of the program is lived in. And if I would have to leave DP leaders with two thoughts that I keep reminding myself, and something that I learned again from the school leader that I really had the privilege to work with for quite some time. One, I would say protect the culture of the program as much as you protect its compliance. As DP leaders, we are naturally attuned to timelines, policies, in academic integrity protocols, assessment security, and all the documentation, because the IB is a high trust, high stakes program at the end of the day. But in focusing on so much on getting the process right, we often underestimate how much the culture of the DP shapes outcomes. At the end of the day, students don't just experience the diploma program through subject guides or assessment weightages. The way challenges are positioned in classrooms, how learning setbacks are interpreted, how those academic honesty conversations are had, whether it is seen as a surveillance or as a shared value. And that culture is set very subtly by program leadership. So I would highly recommend DP leaders to spend as much time shaping the narrative around the DP as they do shaping the structures.
Mhm.
So that would be one thought that I would want to leave. And the other one, and something that closely tied to this, is the need to intentionally build human connection and systems of trust within the program. Like the diploma program is demanding, and not just cognitively for students, but also professionally and emotionally for teachers navigating these high stake assessment decisions, moderation conversations, ongoing responsibilities of supporting learners through all challenges. And while you may have systems and structures and clarity, it is trust that sustains people through inevitable pressure points in those 2 years journey. So creating that regular space and normalizing that vulnerability in a sense is something that must be built in, because to me these are not peripheral to the program's success. On the contrary, it's very central to it. So when systems are built alongside strong relational foundations, processes move, in my opinion, from being compliances to be met to shared commitments that people genuinely believe in.
Well, gosh, thank you so much for that. As you're talking, I'm thinking, boy, this is like the book. We should be listening to this over and over again and sharing this around, and hopefully, lots of people will hear this because I think what you're summarized in just a relatively short time here is really the gist of what IB is trying to do and what we try to accomplish. And I want to give credit to the people that raised you in the DP. In other words, in your previous leaders and so on. And they are very lucky to have you there and doing the work that you're doing. And I wish you very, very well. You've got exams in May like we do here. You're in the Northern Hemisphere. So you're doing
Yes.
that. And so you've got some busy times ahead. A lot of IAs being turned in, and I wish you well with
Yeah.
with all of the work you have in front of you, but it sounds like you have a wonderful support team and a really good personal and professional philosophy.
Absolutely, John. I must add that I have a very, very strong, committed set of teachers and a very, very strong supportive team and an incredibly supportive leadership. So it really helps me navigate through this. And thank you for this chat. I've really enjoyed my time and conversation today. And thank you for having me.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Please check out the podcast notes for links related to this episode. We now have over 135 Ivy Matters episodes covering a wide range of subjects. To help you find topics of interest to you, use our podcast webpage linked in those notes. There's also a link in the notes to directly text us with comments, suggestions, or to let me know that you'd like to appear on a future episode of IB Matters. Find all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future programs. Please note that we are migrating our social network presence away from X. Find us on Instagram at IB_Matters. Also help spread the word about IB by liking, sharing, and reviewing the IB Matters links in your own feeds and social networks. Now in our 7th year, we've been heard in over 180 countries, a testament to the global reach of the IB.